Okay, awesome. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. Just a couple of admin things to get out of the way here for our agenda for this webinar today. So first thing we're going to do is a brief round of introductions here for Nick and myself. We're then going to transition into what is an insider threat and how should we be thinking about it as both cyber and tech leaders. We're then going to take a look at two different cities today. We're going to look at the city and county of San Francisco and the city and county of Atlanta, who both experienced some breaches, and look at the two different outcomes that they had. And then we'll wrap up at the very end with some of our pre-submitted questions that we had before the webinar. So to start things off here, my name is Trent. I am the Senior Vice President of Sales here at SideChannel. With me today, I do have Nick Natu, who is our Chief Technology Officer. We're very excited for today's conversation. And just to establish a little bit of a background here for Nick, since he's extremely humble and would never say this. Nick is actually a former NSA Defense Technical Director. So he knows a thing or two about insider threats when it comes to these topics here. So Nick, I think just to kind of kick things off here, what is an insider threat and who is an insider threat?
Yeah, no, thanks for that introduction. I often don't like to talk about my past, but it's all good. Yeah, so an insider threat, really, I look at them maybe a little bit differently than I think the way the internet likes to sort of frame it. I really consider an insider threat just another threat, right? It's just another potential vector for malware to kind of come through. The difference is that person already has access to your network, right, by design. And they have the accesses that have been sort of granted to them. So you kind of need to treat them, I guess, a little bit differently in the sense of you have to understand sort of what accesses your people have, and then therefore maybe treat them differently. But really, the way that I look at it is it doesn't really matter if somebody hacks my machine or if I am the insider threat, right? Me and my machine have the accesses that the network has granted to them, and now they can go around the network and do whatever they need to do. So, I think the key differentiator that people like to sort of talk about is really intention, and I think that's sort of what breaks them apart a little bit. But from a security standpoint, I don't think that really matters, right? But from an intention standpoint, it certainly is different, right? Intention may be that I'm disgruntled, right? I don't like my employer anymore, and now I want to cause them harm in some capacity. So that may be, I may not necessarily steal, right? Like I may not ransomware them, like the traditional sort of external threat would, but I may want to cause them reputational harm, right? Or I may want to just make operations harder to do. So what they do might be a little bit different, and that could sort of drive, and that's sort of why I appreciate the distinction between the two. But from a technical aspect, I really don't consider them to be super different. Now, there are sort of, the community has sort of adopted sort of a categorization of insider threats. Like, so there's not just sort of one type of insider threat. There's the idea that an insider threat could be somebody who has that intention. Like I said, I'm disgruntled and I want to go cause harm. There's also the sort of unwitting or the unknowingly causing harm, right? So if I'm an admin and I misconfigure something, right, they consider that to be an insider threat situation, which is a good way to think about those problems, because you have to then implement different controls in order to make sure that stuff like that doesn't get doesn't actually get pushed out to production, whether that's your network or any services that you're offering your customers.
Sure. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think a good transition is, for a lot of companies out there right now, since we've had this COVID pandemic, a lot have started to adopt either the remote workforce model or even a hybrid model, right? Where there's a combination of both. We're going into office, or we're having employees, come in through maybe something like a VPN to access the on-prem equipment. I guess a question for you is, for a company that might be following that hybrid model or who's now moved fully remote, does a VPN pose as an insider threat at all?
I mean, it's certainly a risk factor, right? So like the VPN itself wouldn't necessarily be considered the insider threat, but the people who access that device are now no longer sort of inside of the moat, right? The castle and moat analogy of network security architecture is sort of like an antiquated, so 5 years ago kind of model, 10 years ago model of security protection, where you protect your border, right? And maybe you sprinkle some things on the inside, but really like you're concerned about your borders. And you're going to put your sort of best stuff there. But now with people leaving that, they're no longer sort of protected by that. And now they're exposed out there, but still have access. So through that mechanism, they can still get in, right? That VPN's really the way in. And now I just need to figure out how to exploit those folks. Now, whether they're insider threats or not, right? It doesn't really matter whether they're inside or outside that VPN. They are granted those accesses already. So that's it's no longer hopefully the EDR will protect them, right? Because the EDR system or MDR system that may be deployed on all the machines, that initial hack has already sort of happened, quote unquote, right? It's that person already has that access, and now they're going to try to do something, more malicious or something further in the network.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. So I think for our audience that we have today, we've got a lot of both security and tech leaders who've joined us for this webinar today. If I'm in their position, right, why should I be concerned about these insider threats in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, it really goes back to sort of what I said in the beginning of this, right? An insider threat can be as devastating as an external threat. It really doesn't matter whether they're internal or external. They pose a threat. And so thinking that, oh well, we did a background check, when they got hired 4 years ago or 5 years ago, and everything checked out, so we're good, right? That's not really the safest approach, right? I don't want to sort of be super cynical about people, but it certainly happens. And the statistics show the larger the company, the more likely you are to have more than one insider threat. And so what that means is you've got to really understand what people have access to. One, you've got to understand who your people are, right? That's right. I guess the first piece here. And what I mean by that is like their identity in your network. What's their username? Am I tracking that? How are they accessing, systems inside of your network? Now you can kind of think about, okay, let me think about how I can protect my network from any potential insider threat. Is really kind of the language I like to use, just again, because this sort of static, like this person was vetted and now they're okay, isn't super valid in the long run, right? As things happen, as promotions are missed, as internal conflicts happen, like disgruntledness builds, right? Sure. And can then coerce somebody or pressure somebody into doing something maybe that they would regret later, or maybe not, I don't know, but definitely could potentially cause them to do something that maybe they shouldn't be doing.
Yep, that makes a whole lot of sense. So now we've identified what is an insider threat, right? We've talked about why is it important. Now the big question, how do we solve for this, right? So what methods, solutions, as a tech or security leader, what's out there for me today to be able to actually identify who these threats are, where they might be coming from, all that good stuff?
Yeah. So an interesting sort of thing has happened over the last 10 years with the implementation of cloud, and all the cloud SaaS and cloud services that have sort of, exploded everywhere. And now everyone's been running to them for years, I feel like now. Sure. It has really changed things. And then, the pandemic happens, and then it really pushes the workforce remotely. Right. And now there's lingering effects of that, right? Some people are saying, yeah, I know you have to come back to work fully now. And some people are saying, no, it's a hybrid now. And then there's even others who are just like, let's just get rid of the office, right? Let's work remotely. So I think now you have this really broad spectrum of people, or companies that are sort of operating very differently. And the reason why I bring that up is because that's exactly what Zero Trust was sort of there to help mitigate, right? Was all of this cloud and remote adoption. Like, how do I now build security programs that adjust for all of those different scenarios? Well, the benefit of Zero Trust actually is that it also helps protect against this insider threat problem. So it's sort of like is this really modern approach to security, not only from sort of the technical modernness of protecting the infrastructure as it sort of exists today, but also it's really kind of pushed us to thinking about identity management and who, and again, when I say identity, I mean like that username and password, that person on the network and what they're doing. And so what Zero Trust allows you to do is really monitor the tools inside of Zero Trust. Let me specify. Allow you to do is monitor those things, track where they're going, and then limit where they're going, which is exactly sort of what Enclave was built to do. So all of those tools that exist sort of underneath the Zero Trust moniker are really purpose built to protect that remote access, that remote sort of cloud and hybrid models of operating now, but also it really helps on this insider threat piece as well.
Right. That makes a whole lot of sense. I love it. So moving right along in our agenda here, the next thing that we want to cover is this tale of two cities that we're going to be talking about today. Right. What we're going to do is briefly talk about the city and county of San Francisco versus the city and county of Atlanta. Now, both were hit by a ransomware attack. Really identical, right? And city size, even somewhat similar in terms of population, infrastructure, etc. I think the one big difference that we need to call out here is that Atlanta had a flat network, right? And San Francisco had a decentralized network. Before we move on, Nick, could you help me and the rest of the audience understand, like, what is a flat network versus a decentralized network?
Yeah, so flat networks are really sort of a situation where everything can talk to everything on the network.
Right.
You could think of like your home network, unless you're me or other people, I guess, like me, that likes to tinker with things. Your network is probably all, they all have sort of the same IP addresses. Everybody can hit everybody else on that network. There's no blocking anybody from accessing parts of the network, right? That's
Sure.
essentially what a flat network is. Decentralized, especially in the case of San Francisco, is from a very high level, it's decentralized, right? So their MTA was its own sort of network, and the police department was its own network, and all the different municipalities had their sort of own networks. And they weren't connected, so you couldn't get from the police department to the MTA or to the mayor's office, like in Atlanta. And so that's really the core difference is what has connectivity to one thing or another. And so in that decentralized model, what you're doing is saying, hey, we don't want you to access this other part of the network. You don't need access to this part of the network in order to do your job. So that's sort of like the purpose of sort of decentralizing or segmenting. That's really kind of the other terminology out there.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. So what I'm going to mention now is really what the cost difference and the downtime were for these two cities, right? Because we all know as tech and security leaders, when it comes to downtime, we've got to minimize this as much as possible and try and minimize the impact when we have these ransomware attacks. Now, for Atlanta, right, it went down for a number of weeks. Atlanta was out of commission for a number of weeks, right? San Francisco was only down for a number of days. Now, as a result of that, when we look at what the actual recovery costs were, San Francisco's were only somewhere around $50,000, right? When you compare that to Atlanta had recovery costs of $2.6 million. And now, to be clear, this does not include paying a ransom, right? So it's not like Atlanta had a really high ransom versus San Francisco. When we talk about the actual recovery costs here, what we're highlighting is what's the cost of you being down? What is revenue that you're missing out on as a city or a municipality in this case, right? When you're out for that long, this is really what happens. So when we look at actually the impact here, Nick, Atlanta's cost to recover was 52 times greater than San Francisco, right? They were also 4 times slower to recover. I know you just touched on flat networks versus decentralized networks, but why do you think that is? I mean, 52x and 4x, those are some really big numbers.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So to really dig into the number, the cost difference, I think we would have to really understand how each city gets their revenue.
Right.
and be able to like really understand why that disparity is so high. But I mean, just contextually from kind of looking at it, right? Only in the San Francisco attack, the MTA is what was ransomware, and inside of that attack, that was the only part of the network that went down, and it was even a just a part of that network. It was the fares, whatever was collecting the fares for that network, so that part of their network was ransomware. Whereas Atlanta, much more of the network went down. I think even then, I can't remember if the 911 call center or not went down, but like large parts of that whole municipality's network went down. So just from a scope perspective, right, the people it would take to fix all of that, as opposed to the people that would take to fix the MTA network, is very different, right? So the time and just people that would be required to go and fix that is going to be much different. And then the way that the city's collecting money, right? So if again, MTA lost 50K in a couple of days of fares, whereas Atlanta, more of that network was down. And so if there are other revenue, collecting or tax collecting mechanisms that went down, they're losing out on those. So that's really, I think, where that disparity comes through. And then from the cost disparity, and then from the time factor difference, that's really just scope of the intrusion, right? So again, the massiveness of hitting most of the cities of Atlanta's network is really going to be what drives that that time up, right? You're going to need more people doing what now was their day job, is now fixing all these problems that were not a problem before. So that's what's really going to drive the time there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think to talk even on some breaking news even that's happened, right, is we've seen this happen with the city of Dallas in the past couple of weeks, right? I've even read some articles that say their 911 service has been down for days, right? And I think that's I don't know the exact details yet, but I'm going to assume here that's another case of having a flat network design. And I think that it highlights, a really important question out there, which is, if these options are available for companies to decentralize their networks, right? City of San Francisco did a great example of doing that, right? They were down for only a day with a huge ransomware attack. They didn't even wind up paying the ransom, and it was only about 50K in recovery costs. Why are cities like Atlanta, Dallas, some of these places not even decentralizing their networks, right? And maybe even for organizations that are out there too. Why are companies and large municipalities not doing that?
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is it's hard and it costs a lot. Right? At least it used to with previous with traditional sort of networking technology. You could, as you said, right, you could do segmenting pretty much since networking began. Those first routers, and that's exactly what they were designed to do. They block some traffic and let other traffic go through. That's what a router is built to do. And so being able to do that, it was always sort of there, but you needed to really understand, how those systems work, how those routing and switching systems work. So you have to have deep networking deep network experience to be able to do that stuff. And that's all they're doing, right? That means you have a dedicated person who is very skilled, who is likely very expensive. And that's hard, certainly hard for cities to do. Companies are, have I think probably done a better job of hiring those folks and sort of segmenting their networks, because that's going to affect their bottom line, right? So they're going to be more prone to sort of care about that. So I think that's one part of it. The other part of it is that it's also really expensive to maintain that type of network. Right? You have to really understand where everything is, and then as things move, right? Because I know some people don't understand sort of like the living nature of an IT network is constantly in flux, right? People are moving machines and racks around to kind of redesign power, space, and cooling rooms to better maximize and reduce costs. And so things are shifting inside of racks, inside of server rooms, and all of that stuff pretty frequently. And so if you want to do that, because that's going to drive down costs, but what that's going to then do, it's going to increase complexity for you to maintain that segmented network, because now you have to reconfigure routers and you have to reconfigure switches and constantly be doing that. And so the traditional ways of doing this were always cumbersome to kind of maintain. And so like now, with sort of solutions like that we've built with software-defined networking, it's really like brought this like this super hard problem way easier and way less technically, the need for someone who's very technically deep, that need is much lower now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know, both yourself and one of our other founders for Enclave, David Chastain, you both obviously have experience in the government experiencing breaches just like this. And to your point, Nick, both of you have spent time trying to deploy those solutions in there, trying to segment your networks to some degree. And we hear this, day in day with our sales calls that we have here at the organization. It is a challenging thing for organizations to go out and try and do, right? To try and go out and segment their networks. And I think that's a huge reason on why you decided to develop Enclave, right? Is make it a fully managed service that's easy for anyone to use. It uses that software-defined networking you talked about, so it can deploy on top of any kind of network here. I guess any other things you want to add here before we open it up to Q&A for some of the audience and some of our pre-submitted questions?
No, I mean, I think you encapsulated it really well, right? It's sort of minimizing these insider threats and really trying to sort of stop them from being able to propagate, through your network or damage your network in any capacity has been challenging in the past. And now with, the tools that we have and some of the sort of frameworks for zero trust that are coming out, we're able to, really minimize the impact of those threats.
Sure.
Now. And to your point of like kind of bringing up Enclave, like that was like, I don't know if insider threat was sort of top of mind when I was thinking about like, hey, how do I want to build a microsegmentation platform? Sure. But it's certainly, again, like I said, I don't quite think about it in those sort of narrow terms. To me, a threat is a machine or is a person, whether that's inside or out. And really, how do I sort of encapsulate those people in? And that was like one of the big jars. How do I do that? Make that easy without losing like that security. And that's really kind of what we try to do with Enclave. So yeah.
Sure. Makes a lot of sense. Well, great. So what we'd like to do now, we're going to go ahead and actually open up the chat here in just a moment. Looks like it's open now. So for any of our listeners or watchers, if you guys have questions, please feel free to drop those in there. Nick and I will do our best to get to those and answer those before our time's up here. To those of you who submitted questions prior to the webinar starting, thank you and appreciate you. We're going to try and touch on those questions now. So Nick, first one that we have here. Is there a server or cloud-based administrative portal with Enclave?
There is. So Enclave is so as we said, it's a microsegmentation tool. So it really has two main components. One is the agent that lives down on all of the systems. I guess I should say that it is it uses software-defined technologies as I've described earlier, and doesn't require any hardware implementation. So that is so one main component of it is this agent that exists on all these machines. The other aspect of it is this web app that basically controls all of those agents and how that works. So you've got the cloud, you've got the SaaS app that lives up in the cloud that manages all of the agents down below.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense. I'm going to jump over. We got a couple of questions that have come in from some of the viewers here live. Bill asks, are we going to demo Enclave? Bill, we're not going to be demoing it today. We wanted to really just cover insider threats. However, if that's something that you're interested in doing, I'd be more than happy to get some time scheduled up with you. The best way to get in touch with us, if you want to send an email to sales@sidechannel.com, you can submit a request there. And what I can also do is I'll tag your name here, Bill, and have someone follow up with you individually here. Second question, Bill also asks for us, Nick, how does Enclave differ from Illumio?
Yeah, no, great question. So Illumio, it's a great comparison because Illumio is also an agent-based sort of SDN, microsegmentation, zero trust network access tool. So with ours, I think there's two key differentiators that we sort of built in. So the first one is we built a managed service on top of ours. So we at SideChannel will manage that entire deployment and sort of day 2 on maintenance of the platform. So you don't have to have internal teams to learn or bring on people to administer the platform. So that's one aspect of our differentiator. The other is we don't have any other requirements that sort of Illumio does. So what we're doing is really true point-to-point tunnels. If I get too technical here, I apologize. I'll try to keep it high level, but basically what we're doing is from one machine to another machine, encrypting that traffic and creating what's known as a network tunnel between those two devices without anything else in between. So we have some administrative machines that help govern that process, but really the communication path between those two is direct. So that's the other really key point there.
Awesome. Another comparison here that we have, and Nick, candidly, this is a solution I haven't heard of yet. But Sean asked us, how does Enclave compare to AirGap?
Yeah, I know of AirGap. I don't know technically how AirGap works. But the way that I can explain to how our system works, and if Sean knows AirGap and he can maybe make the distinction himself. But so essentially, as we talked about, we have the main web app that is pushing down configuration to all of our agents. So that's the communication going down to those systems, to those agents. Those agents are then communicating directly to one another to create those communication channels that I described earlier. We have another system that coordinates that traffic. It doesn't push any traffic through it. That's known as a beacon. And that beacon is really telling the server side of that communication to dynamically open up a firewall port. And then once that is completed, it's then notifying the user, the client side of that communication to go ahead and start create the requests that they're trying to access. Sure. So it's really sort of a traffic cop sort of in between that's saying, yes, go ahead. Now you can go ahead. And then that direct communication path gets built in between the two.
Yep. Cool. And then to follow up on Sean's other question that he had here, is Enclave agentless? And I think that this question does come from AirGap. Just quickly looking at their website, it says that they're a agentless microsegmentation solution. So good question about, is Enclave agentless?
Yeah, so it's not, and that was sort of by design. I know people have heartburn about another agent, right? And I sat down with this for a while I was thinking about kind of how to architect the system. And what I felt was like a harder ask was to say, hey, let me have access to your network, and here's this hardware device. Like, go install this hardware device. Because that's really the only way to do this, right? So you either need to somehow have access to their network, or access to all the hosts. So I thought the easier ask and the easier thing to do, especially from sort of our management side, the management that we would provide on top of the product that we have, it was just, everything was simpler to kind of put at the agent level.
Sure.
So we built it on top of an agent. Yeah.
Cool. Great, Sean. I see your note here. Thank you. Looking forward to chatting with you. Bill asks another question here. Once the agents are deployed, but before policies are created, do you get to see the traffic?
So we don't ever look at the traffic. So that's one thing there, right? That's sort of another piece that I know some of the systems are sort of monitoring traffic. We'll look at traffic flows, but we're not actually looking at the traffic. So we're seeing who's connecting. We're seeing how many bytes or bits are getting pushed across the wire, but we're not actually looking at the traffic. So basically, once the agent is deployed, all of that is like we're sort of monitoring who is connecting, and that's kind of where we stop. We really don't want to touch the traffic other than encrypt it as we sort of create these tunnels.
Got it. Yeah, and it looks like he just added.
Got it. Yeah. So absolutely, Bill. So yeah, basically looking at the metadata of that traffic for sure. Not looking at that traffic. Absolutely. Yeah, understood.
Awesome. Cool. If there are more questions to our listeners, please feel free to keep dropping those. Nick, one pre-submitted question that we had here was, how does this compare to a VPN? That's a really common question we get.
Yeah. So VPNs are really built to give you access to a network. And the problem with that is once you have access to a network, well, now you have access to everything that's on that network. And so we really wanted to, with the way that technologies kind of have evolved now, we really wanted to get away from that and really follow like the zero trust model. So inside of a zero trust model, it's hard to do. Depending on which VPN vendor, I guess like some of them allow you to do this now, but traditional VPNs would give you access to that whole network block, and then you'd be able to access whatever sort of network block that the VPN had access to. With sort of microsegmentation and Enclave specifically, we're at the port level, right? So we're not only are we saying, hey, you have access to the machine, we're saying you only have access to this port on this machine. So if you have SSH access to that machine, you're only getting port 22. If you have a web access to this machine, then you're only getting 80 or 443. And that's really kind of how far we've scoped it down to limit exactly what that person has access to, so that we can then block all the other traffic that would try to get access to that.
Awesome. I know we kind of touched on this one, but I think it's good to reiterate here. Another question that we had was, much like other legacy solutions out there, is Enclave a physical device that I have to install on something like my network rack?
No, it's not. So the way that the system works is, again, we said it was agent based, and all these agents communicate directly. So we're not touching like SNMP traffic. We're not touching VLANs or any of that on the networking gear. In fact, I don't even care what networking gear you have. As long as there's connectivity from one machine to that other machine, then this whole system will work. Now, the only piece which I mentioned earlier was the beacon. There's this added, I guess, agent is really what it is. It's so that there's this agent sits on a machine somewhere. Now, with our default deployment, we have our AWS instance auto deploy a beacon for you. And so we can manage those and keep those in sort of our platform. If you wanted to, you could bring that beacon into your networks, as long as everybody had access to that system, all the agents, had access to that system, then everything would work appropriately. But you don't have to do that. You could just leave it with us inside of our cloud instance, or as I said, you could put it in your cloud instance as well. It's really just another agent that sits out there, but there is no actual hardware requirement, right? We don't have a device that we send you or that you pick up from somewhere and have to plug in.
Sure. Another question we got here: what does implementation look like for Enclave?
Yeah. So if you have good sort of deployment mechanisms to your network, this is super easy. It's really just installing that agent, and then deciding if you want to install the beacon as well. If you do or don't, there are those methods. And then once it's going, that's pretty much it. We have to register all of the all of the agents to the web app, so that it knows where all the agents are, and then you're pretty much good to go from there. You need to set up the policies and the rules and who has access to what. But once you do that, you're pretty much good to go.
Awesome. Okay, another really common question. We got a lot of these too. Does this replace firewalls?
Does it replace firewalls? So no. I'll say no. I'll stand on my no. Certainly not like a border firewall. Keep your border firewall. It's non-negotiable. What we're utilizing sort of multiple firewalls. That's why it's kind of a complicated answer to say. So we're utilizing the host-based firewall to protect the host. We're also creating another firewall on the tunnel device that we're creating to only allow the specific traffic to come in. So we're adding a firewall and not taking any away. That's I guess the way that I would answer this question.
Got it.
Keep your firewalls.
That's right.
Don't get rid of firewalls.
Don't get rid of your firewalls. Keep those, right? Keep adding these good layers on top.
Yeah.
Okay, another one here. This is a good one. What operating systems does Enclave work with?
Yeah. So right now we support Windows, Linux, and Mac. We are ready to push to mobile architecture, so like Android and iOS. We haven't yet. we really haven't had a customer drive to do that. And that's really kind of what drives a lot of our requirement and dev at this point. We're just trying to figure out, who needs what, and kind of figure out what our customer base is really asking for. And right now, mobile hasn't been a huge piece to this.
Yep. Awesome. And another one we had here, what about switches? Do you need to go down to the switch level?
So I think I understand this question. So no, there's no, like, as I said before, we don't do any there's no configuration needed to be done on any networking equipment. And that was really, again, one of the design features that I wanted to kind of stick to early on, was making this as simple as possible. So if you did have an MSP, or you do have, local network engineers on staff, I wanted to make that as easy as possible to be able to get this to work. So we decided not to go down the route of sort of utilizing the equipment that may be there already that could help us do some of this. And so instead, we decided to go strictly with the agent and that host-to-host communication. So there's no manipulation of any of those traditional sort of networking components needed.
Got it. Okay, let me see. I think we've got one more here to kind of wrap up. What's the best way to get in touch with the team about updates and releases? Great question. I'll drop a couple links here inside the chat to our LinkedIn page, to our website. Also, for all of our security leaders that are on this call, or tech leaders on this call, our CEO, Brian Hoagley, also does his own YouTube channel called cisolife. Posts a lot of great content and information on there. So I'd highly encourage you to go over there, give some of those videos a couple watches too. Looks like we've got one more here from Sean. Just revisiting that earlier VPN question, just check the SideChannel website and saw the text, kill the VPN. Does that mean that Enclave also serves as a software-defined perimeter, something like AppGate, or have I misunderstood?
So the one problem I have with all these sort of new technologies that have come out is that there's a lot of overlap in the capability. So, we consider ourselves a zero trust network access tool, or a microsegmentation tool. Now, with that, we can support sort of north-south traffic, right? So what I mean by that is, if you're remote, can you still use Enclave? And the answer is yes, right? So if you're inside the office, then you can use Enclave to connect internally across that network boundary to across your inside of your network boundary to be able to access those equipment. If that same person leaves and goes to Starbucks or goes home or wherever they're remotely working, then they can still connect, right? There's no reconfiguration that has to happen. The whole system will respond appropriately and dynamically, and readjust sort of all of the controls. Again, as I said, the only thing that needs to be ensured is that communication can flow through. Now, one of the things that we're doing is something called firewall hole punching, which, again, I try not to get super technical here, but basically what that technique allows us to do is to dynamically open up ports on the firewall. And so that's including your border firewall, right? This is how like internet traffic works, how all your internet traffic basically works when you are accessing sort of external resources from inside of your network. The reverse, we make this work in reverse, basically. So when you're out of your network and you want to get in, we do that hole punch on that border firewall and allow that traffic to come in. So we're not exactly a software-defined perimeter per se, but it will work very much in the same vein as a software-defined perimeter, if that helps.
Awesome. Okay, great. Well, I know we're coming up pretty quickly on the end of our time that we have allotted here. Sean, absolutely. Thanks for all your questions, and Bill, thanks for your questions today too. This is going to conclude the end of our time that we have here. So just to reiterate, I dropped a couple of links here inside of our chat to our website, our LinkedIn page, as well as our YouTube channel that's hosted by our CEO. Really appreciate the time here. Again, to stay up to date on things, or if you would like to talk with our team here, please feel free to go ahead and email either sales@sidechannel.com or myself. You can email me directly, Trent@sidechannel.com as well. We'll be happy to put you in touch with the right people. And again, really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with us today on Insider Threats. Happy Friday and have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.